Welcome. Great that you're here tonight. My name is Melanie Stein. I'm a journalist, the creator of the show, and I'm very happy to guide you through this evening. In just 1 month, the European elections take place. And the outcome will be pretty important, since Europe will have to put out many fires at once. We've seen the rise of populism, the resurgence of the extreme right, a cooling in transatlantic relations, and one country choosing to leave the EU, but having trouble to find the door. So the European elections are shaping up to become a battle of ideas for how to address these problems. And part of this battle is going to take place in this room in just a few minutes. We have invited 2 lead candidates for the European elections who both embrace Europe. But of course they have different answers to the challenging problems. And to find out who has the best answers, we have the support of a wonderful jury. So please welcome Kübra Gümüşay, Daniel Hegedüs and Ulrike Guérot. Our first jury member, she is a writer and an award-winning activist, Kübra Gümüşay. Kübra, you've been living in London for 6 years. How does it feel to see now that Britain at least tries to leave the EU?
Well, it first of all showed me that I've been living in a bubble, because living in Oxford, living in London, you would not imagine that such a vote would actually end in such a result. And that again shows how much disparity there is within societies, how much of a polarization can exist within a country.
Our next jury member is a man who was born in Hungary, and he is an analyst for Eastern Europe, Daniel Hegedüs. So Daniel, how does it feel when you see the anti-democratic movements in your home country?
Of course, I'm rather disappointed, but there is also a hope that it's not the end of the way how we are.
Also with us is a professor for European policy. She's the author of a book calling for a European Republic, Ulrike Guérot. Ulrike, when did your passion for Europe arise and the idea of a European Republic come up?
Well, very precisely in June 2012, when the European Council failed again to deal with the euro crisis, and basically all solutions which have been on the table by then, like Eurobonds, unemployment scheme, everything was wiped away. And then I felt like this system is structurally not capable to reform, and we need to envision something else. So I felt like, let's do a European Republic.
Now I'm very happy to introduce to you our candidates. And our first contestant is the joint lead candidate for the German Green Party. Since the election in 2009, he's a member of the European Parliament and an expert on economics. Please welcome Sven Giegold. Our next candidate knows Sven Giegold pretty well because he was the finance minister in 2015 during the Greek economic crisis. And in 2016, he founded the Democracy in Europe movement, DiEM25. Please welcome Yanis Varoufakis. Hello, welcome, welcome.
Guten Abend.
We will start with our first round. The European Union was created to bring peace. It's probably the best example for former enemies trying to work together to solve problems through compromise and discussion. But of course, not everything is great. In fact, the bodies and institutions of the European Union are accused to be anti-democratic and intransparent. The question is this really true? And if yes, how can we react to this? Mr. Giegold, you're the first one, so your answer now.
First of all, Europe is a democratic achievement and not a lack of democratic legitimacy. Europe allows us to take decisions together, which in a globalized world we would not even be able to take. And therefore, Europe is a democratic achievement on the output side of democratic legitimacy. But when it comes to the input side of democratic legitimacy, Europe has great problems. People don't understand who has taken which decision. Many institutions are not fully transparent, and therefore we need to change Europe to become more democratic.
Thank you very much. And now, Yanis Varoufakis, your turn.
The error is to think that the enemy is Euroscepticism on its own. The reason why we have Euroscepticism, xenophobia, and neo-fascism is because of the inane, undemocratic, irrational policies that an establishment committed to business as usual, and we need to get together to change it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Varoufakis. Now I would like to hand over to the jury. Daniel, your question for Sven Giegold.
Mr. Giegold, how would you like to put pressure on the German government to make their behavior, their voting behavior and their positions transparent and accountable, the positions what it represents in the Council?
When it comes to the Council, I think it is important to say what's happening every day. Usually, everything, if there's something positive in Brussels decided, the members of the Council say that's our achievement and sell it on the national level. If there's something which people don't like, they claim it was a Brussels decision. And this is only possible because the documents of the Council are a secret. All member states and also the Council should make transparent which positions they take in Brussels so that this blame game against European democracy by the national countries ends.
Thank you so much. So what's on your mind, Ulrike?
Yanis, you have been focusing a lot on transparency and also on your memories about the ECOFIN Council. If the European Spring comes into the European Parliament, have you clear initiatives how to basically increase supervision in the ECOFIN and to make them transparent?
I can tell you the worst experience when I was in the Eurogroup or ECOFIN was the fact that, firstly, the finance ministers were making decisions on things they had no idea about. Because those decisions were already made in dark chambers behind them. The decisions were brought to them. Most of the decision makers didn't know they were happening. So what is the solution to that? To embarrass them, to live stream those meetings, so that you know what your representatives are doing behind closed doors on your behalf. Because I can assure you, if those cameras, it was full of cameras, if those cameras were switched on and connected to the internet, and you could see what your representatives were doing for them, the decisions would be far better, far more effective, efficient in the end.
Thank you so much for this first round. I'm pretty sure one of them has convinced you more. So please take out your smartphone now. We can see here how many people have cast their vote. They're both pretty good. Thank you so much for the first round. It was a very tight result, so I'm pretty curious about our second round. Both of the candidates say that the European institutions lack democracy, but they are anti-democratic movements in many national states in the European Union as well. We've address problems like the rise of populism, the resurgence of nationalism, an undermining of the rule of law. So do we actually lack common European values? And how should we address the rise of populism? This is the question for our second round. We start with Yanis Varoufakis.
Xenophobic populism is the bitter harvest of 10 years at least, of austerity for the many and for the environment, while our financiers are being treated to a very interesting variety of socialism. The only way of addressing those who have been campaigning with the Gilets jaunes in France against Europe, the only way of addressing the Alternative for Deutschland is by means of a Green New Deal that presses into the service of public goods, including social goods and environmental goods.
Thank you. Sven Giegold, your start now.
Europe has increased problems of xenophobia, of oppression by austerity and a lack of common bold action. And therefore, we need indeed a Green New Deal. We need a Green New Deal financed by overcoming tax competition, by ensuring that the wealth of people and companies, the profits earned in the globalized space, are put into a large investment program in social cohesion and also in overcoming the climate crisis.
Thank you very much. Now, your questions for Yanis Varoufakis.
So, how do you deal with the fact that basically youth data tell us that nationalism is not a generational issue, and that we have in many countries, Hungary, Poland, but also in France, young pluralities of 30+% young people in the age group between 18 and 24 or 25 who actually are very seduced by authoritarian regimes, military regimes, and so on and so forth. So is there any way to deal with this?
Nationalism is always on the rise when young people in particular, but also the middle classes, lose hope. It's the result of hopelessness. Because once you have, in Greece we have 700,000 young men and women out of a small population who had to migrate, and the rest have to learn to live in Greece by taking their expectations and putting them very close to the floor. In those circumstances, there's nothing easier than a right-wing populist saying, I'll make you proud again. We just need to get rid of the Muslims. We need to get rid of the gays. We need to fight the Germans because they're Nazis, right? And this is what the Nazis saying that. Yeah? There's nothing easier. But we have to ask ourselves the question, why have we had, at a time of magnificent technological developments, such a diminution of the prospects of so many different sectors of society? That is a failure of the economic and financial architecture of the European Union. As Europeans who love Europe and love European values, we have to be critical of this.
Danny, your question.
I think it's a matter of fact that the democratic political system is completely undermined in Hungary and Poland. And the question remains how the European Union should react on this challenge.
Yeah. So when we look at the countries which have strong problems with the rule of law, with democracy and fundamental rights, I think the first thing what we have to do is support those in Hungary, those in Romania, those in Poland who are defending democracy, the rule of law. This is our first thing to do, because so often in Germany and in many other countries, we are speaking about some Eastern and Central European countries as if they don't deserve to be part of Europe. They are part of Europe, and we have to support on civil society level and also with the governments and with the European Parliament the forces of democracy in these countries. The next step must be that all member states of Europe have a regular check on fundamental rights and the rule of law. We need to do this. And those member states who systematically refuse to obey to European values, those member states must have a sanction. But a sanction which doesn't weaken the democratic opposition, but strengthen it. And that means take away the power from the national governments to distribute European money and give it to the European institutions so that Viktor Orban and his colleagues can no longer misuse our taxpayer money to fund their illegitimate governments. That's what we have to do.
Your question, please.
So I know that all of you and the Green Party as well have oftentimes stood up against racism, against right-wing populism, and have had many statements against it. But actually this is the least thing one has to do as a decent citizen. There has to be more. What do you intend to do so that those positions, those narratives, those notions, those views will not gain a momentum more than they have already gotten?
I believe the most important project to create a stronger European identity would be creating Erasmus for all young people financed by European money. Because if young people in Europe would marry across countries, create even more than 1 million Erasmus children, it would unify European families. And if the European families are transnational, then we have not only more education and better language skills, but we have a European civil society which cannot be broken anymore by xenophobic nationalism. And therefore we need Erasmus for all.
Make babies.
All right. And now I'm interested, which of the ideas have convinced you most? This was a very tight result for Yanis Varoufakis. So we have a draw. And as you can see, people here are having trouble to choose. We would do a tiebreaker now. And I want you to make us understandable what's the difference between both of you.
The financing of what he calls a Green New Deal and what I call a Green New Deal is different.
Yes.
And his financing is based on the idea the European Central Bank buys bonds from the European Investment Bank. In Germany, this...
Maybe I can introduce my policy and then you can criticize it.
Please. No, please let...
If you introduce my policy, then what is my job?
You can do it as well. You can turn it around then afterwards. But what I want to say is, in the German public debate, even if I agree that European central banks can be used in order to finance common goods, in the German debate, this is absolutely toxic. If we do this, we would have not a smaller, but a much larger AfD. And this is why the German Greens and the European Greens asked for ending the tax competition game and use the money from a common company taxation to finance the Green New Deal. Was it unfair, Yanis?
Incomplete. What we're saying is, to begin with, it's important, first, to work out what is the minimum funding that a genuine green transition requires. How much money do we need to spend on the green transition? We have to work it out. Because, you know, the Fridays for future people, when the adults are behaving like children, the children grow up to look at us as adults and point the finger at us and say, you're not doing enough. And they are right. What is enough? The minimum of enough is 5% of European GDP. That's 500 Eurozone GDP, let's say. That's about 500 billion every year. That's a minimum that we need to spend to have a genuine green transition in energy, transport, industry, and, of course, agriculture. Where does the money come from? Will it come from taxation, from harmonizing taxes, which are, of course, we are completely in agreement with. We need to do that. But the most you are going to get over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, by the time you do that, is about 50 billion over 3, 4, 5 years. No. Really not enough.
No, no, no.
By the time you harmonize it and you start collecting the taxes.
You get
now, let me complete my story and then you can rebut it. What we are saying is, as we speak now, there is something between 2.5 and 3 trillion euros in the financial circuits of the European Union that is doing nothing but harm. It is beating up house prices in Berlin and Hamburg. It is beating up equities, share values, because companies borrow it in order to buy back their own shares. It's doing nothing productive and nothing green. What we are suggesting is that the European Investment Bank, which belongs to all of us, issues bonds of 500 billion every year, and the European Central Bank makes an announcement, effectively remind us of what it is already doing, Sven. This is not a new idea. That it will buy them if there is a need to prop up their price, if there is a need. By making that announcement, it will not have to buy them. Suddenly, we have 500 billion every year to invest in the Green Energy Union to stop Germany relying on lignite, and so on and so forth. With one stroke, you have a substantial amount of money, money that can be mobilized and pressed into the service of the environment and good quality jobs in Germany, in Greece, in Portugal, tomorrow morning, within the rules and within the treaties, and that is our Green New Deal.
Yeah. The problem is, after I read your program, of course, I asked progressive lawyers, is this legal in the treaty, what you are proposing?
Of course it is.
And the view of progressive lawyers is, if politicians demand and states demand from the central bank in the framework of now a legislation or in the framework of an election campaign to commit on a 5-year buying program announcement, this would be illegal and would be seen as breaking European law. We need economic programs which allow investments in the green transition to happen. We don't need a new financing program. There's lots of money in the market, but we need to allow a policy which makes finally environmental destruction unprofitable and green investments profitable.
The proposal that I put forward, that we put forward, is entirely legal. And let me tell you how I know it. I didn't ask any lawyer. When I was a governor of the European Investment Bank back in 2015. And that proposal I put to the board of governors of the European Investment Bank. And I can tell you there wasn't a single voice in the board of directors of governors of the European Investment Bank who said that it is illegal. Indeed, Werner Hoyer, the president, was very much in favor of it. But the European Investment Bank cannot do it on its own. It needs the green light from the European Union Council. Now, you are quite right. If we have a formal directive to the European Central Bank, buy those bonds, then you violate the independence pretense of the European Central Bank. But what I'm telling you is that the European Central Bank is already buying those bonds. And Mario Draghi, Benoît Cœuré, and everybody else would love to have more EIB bonds to buy. Look at what they did a month ago. Because they have nothing to buy, they don't have good quality green bonds to purchase. They ended up giving another load of cash to buy rubbish bonds, even McDonald's bonds, Volkswagen diesel bonds, not green bonds. They would love to be able to buy green bonds if there were any, but there aren't any.
Thank you so much. Now we have a much better idea about the differences. Please choose your favorite now. We have a first winner, Yanis Varoufakis. Big applause for the first winner. And our second winner is Sven Giegold. Thank you so much to both of you. Bye-bye.